thank you. First of all, thank you, Christos, for inviting me and for making your space, your platform available. It's so wonderful to have the opportunity to share something that I'm interested and passionate about to other people who are interested and passionate about dance and movement and Biodanza. Maybe there are people here who aren't familiar with Biodanza. I'm not 100% sure who is all here. But essentially, my presentation tonight is going to be an exploration and kind of some thoughts that I've put together over the years of what I call intersections, so places where there's connection between these two practices. But I think before I do that, yeah, just to give, for those of you that don't know, I am a Biodanza facilitator since 2009. I've mostly made my work is as a ceramic artist, but I've always taught mindfulness and Biodanza sort of as along the sides. And since COVID upended all of our lives, things swapped around for me. So my ceramics is now to the side, and I feel that my movement practice and my meditation practice is now where I'm going to be focusing on. So that's why it was lovely to start looking back in time and prepare something that I think reflects where I'm at the moment and what I hope to develop going forward. So what I'd like to do before I begin the presentation is actually to invite us all to be here together. So we are here, we've all signed on, you know, we're interested and are, you know, here out of curiosity. And the invitation is to invite yourself to be even more present. So to really feel yourself in the physical space that you are in. And if you'd like to, you can allow your eyes to shut to feel more fully, but that's not necessary at all. But just feeling how, just where you're sitting, you are making contact. So there's a sense of receptivity. You're already being received. And you are generously being received by the earth, by the seat that you're in. And just take a nice deep breath in, and as you breathe out, just feel how you can settle. And really bringing all of your presence and your energy and your life force to this shared space together. Okay, so here we are. The name of this presentation is called Stillness-Dancing, and it also describes this practice that I'm exploring and putting together. And for some history, how this all came about. In 2003, I was given a very rude shock by life. I was diagnosed with a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymphatic system. And both Biodanza and mindfulness kind of arrived as these two powerful healing modalities at the same time. And both of them invited this incredible opportunity to embrace the mystery and the miracle and the madness of being in a body. And both invited and offered a sense of what it is to feel vital, alive, connected, even in the face of what is difficult and suffering. So really like this incredible initiation. And my life was very unbalanced. You could say that I was living in sympathetic overdrive, very adrenalized. And, you know, the way that I like to describe it is that I was merrily dancing along at a very fast pace in my life. And suddenly I was tapped on the shoulder, a little bit like if you do the tango, someone, you know, there's a new partner who arrives, and this partner was illness. And I like to say that this was a dance you couldn't refuse to do, and it was a dancing partner that you couldn't say no to. So I really had to, you know, kind of drop what was happening and meet this dance. So the two incredible men entered my life. And the first one is John Kabat-Zinn, who was one of the fathers of modern secular mindfulness. And in the 1970s, he was the first person to apply mindfulness into a healthcare and stress context with his development of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And so a few months after being diagnosed, I was completely like at sea. I didn't know what to do and how to do it. And some friends offered me the gift of joining a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which I did. And it was just really a total game changer for me. It was a real turning point in learning to turn towards and manage this really quite overwhelming situation. And also to learn the language of the body, and to learn to turn towards and to be with what was happening. And I was so passionate about this that in 2005, I decided to go off. At the time, you couldn't study mindfulness here. So I went off to the University of Massachusetts and learned to teach this MBSR program, which I've done in various forms over the years. But the thing that I really just love that John Kabat-Zinn says is that as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter how ill or hopeless you may feel. And this was such a beautiful kind of guiding principle, which I've used for many years along the way. So that was the first wonderful man. And this just before I go further, I'll use this as an opportunity to just describe a little bit for those of you that maybe don't know that mindfulness is it's a practice which can be described as an ongoing remembering to enter the here and now through bringing moment to moment, non-judgmental attention to whatever is arising in our body, our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations. And mindfulness meditation is the formal practice to cultivate the skill of mindfulness, which actually is a natural skill. We all have this capacity, but we kind of get very, very lost in thoughts, lost in stories, lost in worries. And so this practice is about remembering what it is to be present. And the tone that we kind of develop and grow alongside this presencing is a tone of non-judgment. And that is a kind, curious, interested tone. So when we start a meditation practice, it can be quite shocking to actually see what goes on in our minds. And we want to run away. And there's often very strong internal criticism about ourselves or about our process or about our lives. And so one of the key skills to develop is this kindness, this curious kindness. And so slowly and gently, we kind of grow self-acceptance, self-love, and loving awareness is really revealed at the heart of all of life. So now I can get on to the next wonderful man who introduced this system into the world, Rolando Toro, also in the 60s. And John Kabat-Zinn, I don't know if I mentioned, it was in the 70s that he started the MBSR program. But post the war, Rolando in the 60s, was instrumental in offering this very revolutionary system to the world. I had only just started doing Biodanza in 2002, and it was also absolutely key to my process of healing and well-being. And in 2004, I started a cycle of the School of Biodanza, and as I've said, was facilitating since 2009. And also just to say, it was really wonderful. Life is very mysterious. When I was a child, I loved to dance, and then I wanted to study dance therapy, but couldn't afford to go overseas. And so it was really quite startling 15 years later to find that here was a dance movement practice that I had the opportunity to learn, to facilitate, and also to use for my own growth and development. So that's always, the beautiful fruits of what is difficult. Brought to my life. So this is a very famous quote by Rolando, who says that Biodanza draws its inspiration from the most primitive origins of the dance, and that at its most primordial and deepest sense, dance is the movement of life. and the movements of dance are the movements of life. And so the system of human development, which uses music and movement in a group setting, very carefully chosen music and exercises, they invite us into the moment, into feeling, into connecting, into embodied aliveness, and to invite us to a more authentic and instinctual way of living. And through Biodanza, we can find our way back home to a really joyous and pleasurable, coherent feeling of home inside of ourselves and our bodies, in amongst our friendships, in amongst the group. And yeah, really move fully with our humanness. And so, yeah, so kind of to bring that together, so that was the life path, the two really supportive practices that arose and that I was very strongly committed to. And when you train to be a Biodanza facilitator, you have to write up a little thesis using, some aspect of your own personal experience. And mine was called Good Medicine, Biodanza, Mindfulness, and the Creation of Wellness. And, essentially, what I came to feel is that there's such a strong point of connection, that both of these forms offer an intention to reclaim something really fundamental about what it is to be a human being, to have the capacity to live authentically, to touch life, to be touched by life, and to reclaim humanity with compassion, with joy, vividness, humor, delight, and with presence, and with being able to be with. One of the things I think that is one of the greatest gifts of a mindfulness practice is really being able to be more and more present, more and more available to the moments of our lives, instead of them just kind of going past in a blur. And sometimes moments can be very difficult and traumatic. Other times they can be full of joy, very intense, very delicious. And the practice of mindfulness is really learning to be more available to everything that's happening. And I think, from my experience, Biodanza also offers the same kind of space to be fully with whatever emotions arrive as part of a human life. And so, yeah, I think that both of them are this very beautiful vessel. Both have got very ancient roots, and Stillness-Dancing is the name that I've given to this exploration. So let me see what is next. Okay, so this could be a very huge, long presentation, because I've got so many thoughts about it, but and I'm not going to touch on all of these, but essentially I feel that there are places where the world views of the two different modalities intersect. The intention, so if we sit down to practice meditation, or if we enter a Biodanza class, what is the intention up front? What are the outcomes? What are the, in what state are we left after we've done practice? And what are some of the actual offerings, the practices that we actually do? So these are all places where there's points of connection. And then, of course, they're very different systems. So they're places where they each goes in its own beautiful, direction, as its own path. And also to say that, obviously mindfulness is a really very broad word, which is also, it's an umbrella for many different practices. Whereas I think Biodanza, especially if we're operating authentically within the system, is very specific. And, it's a very coherent body of work. Whereas mindfulness, it's incredibly broad, and you could come to it in many directions. For me, as I say, it's been through the MBSR. But I think at the heart of what both these practices offer, and I think they're mutually supportive, is of what is it to be in a body? What is it to actually explore life, have this life in a human embodied form? And how incredible it is to be able to move, to be able to breathe, to be able to dance, to be able to connect, So everything that it is to be a human body and in a human body are up for exploration, for celebration, for being with in both of these practices. And the word for how we could describe this intensity of feeling in Biodanza is known as Vivencia. And Rolando, a quote directly from him, is that the Vivencia is the intense and passionate perception of being alive in the here and now. And it's the method that we have to help us have this direct experience of the sacredness of life and this felt sense oneness with the universe. And you know, those of us that are assuming there are lots of Biodanza people here, but it's a very broad word. It's used to describe the experience itself. It's also used to describe the exercises, or if you go to a class or a workshop, it's also called a vivencia. And also the vivencial method is the way in which these effects are brought about. And it comes from the word vivir from Spanish, which means to live. And the real wonderful point of contact, which I think is probably what got me going in the very first place, is that mindfulness is a present moment awareness-based practice. And it's the practice of understanding very experientially, moment to moment, that life really only happens in the moment. Any moment that has passed is no longer accessible to us. It only exists in this moment as a memory, as an echo, as something we're ruminating about or remembering. And any moment that's yet to come hasn't happened yet. So it's never going to be what we think it is. And so when we profoundly experience the truth of this reality, for me, this completely echoes what it is to experience vivencia, what it is to be completely located in the present moment and not pulled into the past and into the future and into abstraction. And what is also amazing is the mind cannot control either of these states of being. So if you're in the Biodanza class and you are able to, through the music, through the movement, drop into this felt sense, your mind can't will you to do it. The music and the exercises evoke this. It comes about spontaneously. And Rolando says that as water flows from a fountain, the vivencia arises with spontaneity, freshness, and the quality of the original source. It's not under the control of consciousness. And it's the same thing when you practice mindfulness and you work deeply with what does it mean to be aware of the present moment itself and to be aware of how the mind layers over the present moment, we begin to see that you can't use the mind to control a meditation. It's the same thing. It reveals itself. The present moment reveals itself. And so this for me in my own practice has felt like two beautiful points of contact. So vivencia and grounding. So now here is where, and you please forgive me, these are my creative meanderings and musings. And there is, in Biodanza, we very much, we dance from a sense of groundedness, from a sense of being in our bodies, and from that place we can move outward and beyond and transcend and grow into dance into a bigger space of ourselves. But very important is this idea of being grounded. And it's the same in a meditation practice. We're not trying to throw ourselves away and be some better version of ourselves or some different version of ourselves. We are learning to ground ourselves in the reality of who we are. So it's really about cultivating a solid ground within ourselves and just really feeling it's okay. I can move through life from this place, and this place is who I am right now. And so to feel that and to know that in Biodanza, those are the dances of identity, dances that help us with healthy ego development. And in meditation practice, it's very much about learning to come to center and to living your practice from embodied presence. And we have this idea of integration and attunement, which both practices, are central to both practices. In Biodanza, we have dances of integration, which are about moving holistically. We have dances of self-attunement, which link to meditation practices of self-compassion. And both mindfulness with oneself, so in other words, intrapersonal mindfulness, that is basically attuning to ourselves, is like a very deep listening. It's a trusting and a learning to attune to one's own self. And in Biodanza, we have lots of dances of learning to drop in, to hear deeply, to listen deeply to our own hearts, to what is true for us. And so this is another point of contact. And then we have interpersonal mindfulness, or attunement, or dancing together. And the metaphor for both tuning into ourselves and tuning into each other is a little bit of that metaphor of an instrument. So you don't just pick up and play an instrument, you tune it, you give it some love, and you doesn't have to be perfect at first, you just stay very present. And so that's how we work with ourselves in meditation. It's also how we work with ourselves when we dance. And then it pops over into how we relate to each other and how we relate to the group. This idea that we're a whole lot of instruments who need to attune to each other. And so we pay careful attention to ourselves and to the other, and then to the group. So there's this idea of attunement, intrapersonal attunement and interpersonal attunement. And, Rolando's vision of interconnectedness is the interconnectedness that the Buddha was talking about. And, all of the suffering and disconnection that we see in the world is ultimately because we have lost touch with the heart of love, cooperation, integration, and solidarity that is natural. And it's conditioning, and it's suffering, and it's not knowing that we are living our conditioning and our suffering out in the world. That is because, is why we as human beings are experiencing so much strife. So I think both of these systems, when you deeply immerse yourself in them, offer a glimpse into what is natural, what is possible, what is true for us as a species, which is this interconnectedness. And a kind of a relationality. Daniel Siegel, who's a interpersonal I think it's a neurobiologist, has got this term we, which is a combination of me and we. And he says that actually relationship is the flowing energy between us. It's not me and then you over there. It's actually all one flow. And I think Rolando was completely keyed into this, and that the whole Biodanza system is really an opportunity to live that more and more and more. And just aware of time, making choices. So not just interconnectedness with ourselves, with each other, but also with the environment. And, Rolando said that it's important to realize the extent to which we're embedded in the totality and are part of the entire phenomenon of life. And, the Buddhist teacher Ram Dass puts it like this. He says, the human being is nature. We are so used to feeling ourselves beyond nature or above nature or lording over nature, but actually we are nature. And there's this wonderful term, interbeing, which was coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Zen Buddhist poet and teacher and peace activist. And he says that all things are made up of component parts and do not have a separate existence. They are with everything else. And the lovely example that he uses to describe this is, he says, for example, the orchids on my desk, they're interdependent on the sun, the rain, the environment in which they grew, the gardener, the trucker, the salesperson, and me. I brought them here. And so basically all of that had to happen. All of that interconnectedness had to happen for the beautiful flowers to arrive. And so he speaks about this interbeing, that everything is connected to everything else. And that if you had to zoom down, you know, more and more and more, we see that that is true for absolutely everything. And I think that the notion of wholeness, this is one of, you know, a really powerful image from a large biodanza, Vivencia, which is this idea that, you know, through this image you can see that there is a real expression of a sense of oneness. This what can be described as an infinite, intimate, indivisible whole, and that we are each whole in and of ourselves. We are part of larger and larger circles of wholeness that we may never even know about. And just the sense that we're never alone. We already belong. We belong to the species. We belong to this moment. We belong to our breath. And so, you know, a meditation practice brings you more and more into contact with that inside of yourself. And Biodanza circles invite us to that again and again, and also to work with what gets in the way of that, to learn to drop the, you know, the veils of separation in a way that's safe and comfortable and respectful. So I just wanted to suggest a few dances in the 5 lines of Vivencia. I'm just going to whiz through them, you know, for those of you that maybe aren't so familiar. But the first is vitality, which is this this real sense of the joy and spirit of life. And Rolanda said that if we were able to realize that happiness is an intrinsic condition of existence, you know, this would be living the truth of life. And the Buddha also had a term for a natural, like a spontaneous joy that arises when we practice, which is a very subtle and spontaneous joy. It's a natural joy that arises and kind of bubbles up from our practice. And, you know, above all, what every human being desires and wants is happiness, even if they're going about it in terrible ways. Everyone just actually, you know, wants to feel connected. And, you know, and happiness is actually the natural human state. And dances of vitality really put us in touch with this strong will to live and with this joy of life. And creativity. You know, for me, this is a really wonderful connection point. So the line of creativity, which, by the way, the 5 lines, when Rolando was putting together his theory, he was asking a lot of questions to people. You know, what is it that you're interested in? What is it that you want from life? And eventually he pulled out these 5 central themes, which all Biodanza classes and processes are designed around. So we've had vitality and creativity, which is this capacity that we all have to be creators, and not just creators as artists or sculptors or, you know, artists in that sort of more traditional sense of the word, but just to live creative lives. And there's a deep link between creativity and presence, which links to the idea of what I was saying earlier in terms of the present moment, is that you can only create from this moment. You cannot create in what has been. Too late, we've missed that moment, and the one to come we don't know. So the more in touch we are and the more vivid this moment is to us and available to us, the more we're able to create from this place. And in fact, life unfolding is the spontaneous creating that is happening moment by moment by moment. And yeah, I think that one of our greatest gifts, creative gifts, is our awareness. But most of the time, you know, we are on autopilot. So the practice of returning, learning to be present, learning to feel alive in our bodies, gets us right in touch with the creative potential of the moment. And from there, we can make choices. We can do different things. You know, even sometimes what's creative is just to do something different, you know, than you did the day before. And if you're lost to the moment, you can just get onto autopilot so quickly. So that for me is also a crossover point. Sexuality or sensuality, one of the lines in Biodanza, which is really about taking pleasure in existence. And they are, you know, sensuality in a mindfulness practice is all about learning to experience life through the five senses, through the five portals that keep us in touch with life so richly, so miraculously. And again, we kind of can take it for granted. So coming to our senses in our meditation practice is learning to live sensually. And this is a very important theme or line in Biodanza as well. And then there's a line of affectivity, which invites us to our natural ability to connect to other people, to meet each other with empathy, with love, with altruism. And, you know, from my own, you know, maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but I really feel that mindfulness is a befriending practice. It is like the ultimate affectivity practice, which is of befriending ourselves, of offering ourselves love, contact, care. And so in Biodanza, we practice this with ourselves, and we get an opportunity to practice through the exercises. But this theme of affectivity, like it's an intimate practice which doesn't leave anything out, was the next line. And transcendence. So transcendence is this, it's this dancing beyond our limited identities, and we practice this capacity to kind of penetrate through the sort of march of time into the timelessness. And you know, Vivencias are gateways. This timeless moment that we can enter into the space of pure being. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit, but they're dances that support us getting into the space of just being able to really not engage with the content of the mind, but to spontaneously live and move from the ever unfolding moment. Of course, as I've said before, none of this is under the control of the mind, but it is lovely to know and to have had the experience that these dances are possible and that these moments are possible. And then some dances when I've been teaching, when I've put some vivencias or classes together, what I'll do is I'll follow a traditional structure of a Biodanza class. And there are lots of dances that we're already doing in a Biodanza class, but then just the way that I will introduce the dances, the language that I might use will be, you know, perhaps what is specific to this exploration that I've been doing. So for example, in Biodanza, every Biodanza class, there's walking. It's absolutely fundamental. You know, to walk through life, you have to have the courage to be yourself and to express yourself. And then there are many different expressions of these walks. And one of the primary practices that the Buddha offered was you can meditate standing, sitting, lying down, or walking. So if you go into a meditation retreat, that'll be one of the forms of practices that is offered. And Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about walking as if you're kissing the earth with your feet. And so there's something about the presence that you bring to the walk in both of these that I think is very resonant. Dances of rhythm. So to be in touch with the rhythms of life, to be in touch with the breath, to be in touch with the changes in the body. Everything has rhythm, everything dances, says Maya Angelou. And so, you know, to enter into the dances of rhythm are also to bring our attention to the fact that we are rhythmic beings, that we have cycles, that things change, that things are always in movement, which is a truth. Impermanence is a truth and at the heart of the Buddha's teachings. So change is the only constant, and to be moving and to learn to move with rhythm and to follow the impulses of rhythm is such an exquisite skill that we develop as we dance. This capacity to be comfortable with change and in fact to learn to move with it. Then a really biggie is the breathing dance, which is in Biodanza, the breathing dance, even though it's part of vitality, it's a dance that often bridges from the more upbeat, energetic, sort of more conscious part of the class, a little bit more into the softer, gentler, more transcendent time in the class. And so, you know, learning to breathe and doing the breathing dance is absolutely fundamental in Biodanza. And Rolando himself said that breathing is the most direct path to our body. And in meditation, you know, obviously, as I've said, there are lots of ways to meditate, but in mindfulness, mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the body is the primary practice. And the breath is an anchor into the present moment. It's also a sign of the constant rhythm and change that's happening. So it's both time-bound and timeless. And in our mindfulness practices, we learn to ride the waves of the breath, the waves of change, to find the steadiness that's here. And in Biodanza as well, we dance the breath. And yeah, this, I think, you know, this dance also really reminds us to slow down, you know, and I think so many of us take up a mindfulness practice to learn to just slow down because everything's going so fast and we're living our lives at such a crazy pace. So to just slow down, take a breath, come to center, feel where you're connected to the earth is just, that's just a moment of mindfulness. It's a moment of presence. And so this is a lovely resonance. And dances of fluidity, yeah, just very beautiful. There's so many dances of fluidity, but in Biodanza, very few dances are actually taught. But these dances, which are, I think, inspired from Tai Chi, are really about learning to access continuous fluid movement that doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end. And when we are able to dance in this way, when we are able to be with the breath in this way in our practice, that is, you know, that is truly entering the living reality of the present moment. So for me, those have both been, yeah, in very powerful ways, and fluidity dances really powerful ways of experiencing that. Then we have dances in Biodanza of Utani, which is around being in touch with and attuned. That attunement that I was speaking about earlier, just like sensing this is me, this is the other, but there's a place where we connect. And if I go in closely enough, then we actually notice that there's no separation there. And so dances like this, where we have some gentle contact with other people, become this opportunity to tune into ourselves and to the other, and to tune in together. Dances of resting, you know, as I've said, the Buddha says you can practice your meditation lying down. In fact, there's no excuse. Your whole life is an opportunity for your practice. But I'll say from my own experience, when I was ill for many years, I couldn't do a sitting practice. I didn't have energy. So just lying down and breathing, being close to the earth, you know, these are, this is physiological well-being, and this is dances of resting, dances of nests in Biodanza are also about connecting with the earth and, you know, having a harmonizing effect on our systems, on our bodies. And so this capacity to rest and slow down is vital to both. Then here we come to places of divergence, and I'm going to be ending off soon so that we can have some chance to speak. But you don't really, in mindfulness, you don't really use music. I mean, there's lots of meditation that uses music. So, but in mindfulness, you actually are you generally paying attention to something that's arising very close to your own experience. That being said, you could put on music and listen very mindfully and, you know, be very present to the soundscape. But this is a bridge too far. And so, you know, in Biodanza, the use of music is absolutely, it's central, because music is evocative, and it's everything. So the one lovely little intersection that I found was, I found this wonderful Buddhist nun who, she's got the most incredible voice, and she sings her mantras. And what she says is that there are two kinds of music: one that makes your mind jump out of itself and fly around and shake your body, and there's another kind of music where you come home to yourself, where you rest. And so I think those, you know, we have all kinds of amazing music in our Biodanza system, but generally a traditional mindfulness practice doesn't use music. So that's the one thing. And then in Biodanza, we work very precisely and carefully with the emotional landscape, and emotions are actually evoked in Biodanza to work with. And in a mindfulness practice, we don't necessarily evoke emotion, but we certainly work with emotion. So emotion is just another thing to be aware of, and to work with that kind of kind, curious, non-judgmental attitude that I was mentioning earlier. But you know, it's, I think those are the things that really make Biodanza very, very special, is the music, emotion piece of the practice. So I think what I'd like to say is that the thing that I think is the most wonderful potential is to be able to recognize that Biodanza itself can be practiced with more or less mindfulness, that you can go into a Biodanza class, or in fact any kind of dance class, and you can dance, but you might not be aware of what is actually going on. So to be able to be more mindful in the Biodanza circle, to be with what arises inside yourself or in the group, really, I think is where there's a real possibility for mindfulness to deepen the experience of Biodanza, not to take away from it or to add something else, but to be able to bring that skill. It's like a deepening skill of knowing in this sort of kindly, spacious way, and being aware. So yes, I want to mention that apart from running just smaller vivencias, the thing that really where I feel that this has been successful is in retreats that I've run, which I've called Still Point of the Dance retreats. And that's really a whole weekend of both teaching the mindfulness practice and doing Biodanza vivencias. So like one following the other, And I think for me, this is really where it's been effective. But I've had a lot of wonderful feedback, even just doing simple vivencias. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it, is that I think both Biodanza and mindfulness are all about reality. And Rolanda says, anchor yourself to reality through the dance. A mindfulness practice would say, you know, anchor yourself to reality through the breath, through the felt sense. And ultimately, I think both of them really at the heart have got this, a real desire to support us as human beings, liberating ourselves from conditioning and unwinding our, body, mind, emotional conditioning that causes us so much suffering. And to just, to put us in touch with what is real, with what is nutritious, with what is splendid about being a human being.